Hello and welcome back to this week's edition of the NFL Recap with Between the 20s, the Chicago sponsored podcast talking about all sports all the time. As always, I'm Bryce Weisholtz. Unfortunately, Amer could not make it this week, but we do have Mike with us. Mike, how you doing?
I hope it's not a surprise that I'm here. I am, after all, one of the three hosts. You said it like it was being discounted, but while we do miss Amer, we're both here excited to talk about week 2.
Yes, it should be fun. It should be fun. Mike, I know we're going to talk about week 2, but I heard you had some a really good fantasy baseball week.
Yes, great fantasy baseball week. Won in the semifinals, headed into the finals. Maybe we can get into more fantasy baseball on this podcast next year, but it's definitely good in fantasy baseball time. Much worse than fantasy football. 1-4 this week in my 5 leagues, so I guess it could be better. Take my advice with a grain of salt.
That's okay. I'll make up for you. I went 2-1 this week, but we'll definitely get some fantasy baseball in there come springtime. For those of you who missed the week 1 show, the way this works is that Mike and I are going to go back and forth talking about each game, each team, some key takeaways that we had from these games fantasy-wise, but also some general news, some injury news. Obviously, lots of injury news this week, so we'll get into that in a moment, and we'll go through each game one by one. We'll start here with the Thursday night game. Buccaneers took down the Panthers 20-14 in somewhat of a surprise with the Buccaneers on the road in Charlotte. Mike, I don't know about you. This was a weird game for me to watch. Cam just looked off. What did you think?
Yeah, definitely a bit of a weird game, especially when you have Christian McCaffrey rushing for only 37 yards, averaging 2.3 yards per rush, and only having 2 receptions as well. No touchdowns for CMC. But on the other hand, for the Buccaneers, Peyton Barber with a very good game, 82 yards on the ground with a touchdown. So a bit of a mixed bag here. I'd say looking good for the Buccaneers, though.
Yeah, so that was actually one of my questions that I wanted to get into, or one of the ideas that I had. Obviously, week 1, Ronald Jones is more of the guy, 75 yards week 1. I think he had under 10 this week. You mentioned Peyton Barber. He had a big day. How are you looking at this backfield moving forward? Should either one be owned? Should both be owned? Neither?
Yeah, it's really a tough decision, but I think right now Peyton Barber is available in 64% of ESPN leagues. So if he's out there, I might definitely draft him and stash him on the bench a little bit to see if you get any sort of clarification of this backfield going forward. And then Ronald Jones, I'd say maybe the same thing, although I imagine he's rostered in more leagues.
I agree with you. I think both guys are definitely that borderline roster kind of guy. Peyton Barber, in my mind, is a little bit safer. He's not going to boom any kind of week. Ronald Jones, we're still waiting for him to break out. It's been a couple years now. He was pretty highly touted coming out of USC. So we'll see how that goes with him. But for now, Peyton Barber had a big week. Ronald Jones had a big week. We'll definitely have to monitor that. Another big piece of fantasy news from this game, O.J. Howard. 0 targets. If you remember from the ranking show that we did, the first episode of this podcast, Amer and I, very, very high on O.J. Howard. And this is just depressing. I have him in a lot of leagues. O.J. just didn't show up. And to me, I might give him one more shot. He's got the Giants next week. Really good matchup. If he does nothing against the Giants, I might relegate him to my bench.
Yeah, it's really tough having Guseg sort of in your fantasy lineup. But I do have to say also, Peyton Barber is actually owned in more leagues than Ronald Jones at this point. So I'd say they're all both around 50, 60% though. So if they are out there, I'd definitely pick them up. But I still think you got to wait for this backfield situation to clear before starting either one of them.
Definitely. And there's also the presence of Dare Ogunbowale, the undrafted rookie or late round rookie that they have too. Flipping to the Panthers side of the ball, it's just some injury news right now. Cam looked off on Thursday, definitely didn't look like himself, wasn't running at all. News broke this morning. Cam Newton is dealing with that foot injury that plagued him in the preseason again. That explains a little bit as to why he's not running. I do have Cam in one league, and at least this explains what's been going on with him. I don't think Cam Newton, Mike, you might disagree with me, I don't think he's startable right now. That is to say the receivers, I think, still are. Curtis Samuel, obviously, big day, 13 targets, 5 catches, 91 yards. DJ Moore, 14 targets, 9 catches, 89 yards. So even with the hobbled Cam Newton, the receivers getting it done. But with this Newton injury, I don't know if I can feel comfortably starting him as my quarterback one.
I mean, I think the beauty of it is it's a weekly game, and every league is sort of independent of the other. Obviously, you can have deeper leagues, two quarterback leagues, where Newton probably is, or virtually is, it's a lock, especially in a two quarterback league. But if you have a quarterback on your bench who you feel has a better matchup, or there is one out there, I'd definitely go for that, considering that Newton is dealing with this injury. But I wouldn't necessarily push the panic button all that hard right now. And I still feel relatively comfortable starting Newton.
Well, Mike, let me ask you this. You mentioned some guys out there. Matthew Stafford in ESPN leagues is owned under 50%. Josh Allen is owned under 50%. Would you start either one of those guys in one QB formats over Cam Newton?
Like I said, I think it depends on the week. So I would always just look at the matchups, but there are going to be a lot of quarterbacks that are going to be getting picked up this coming week. For example, I had Roethlisberger in one of my leagues, so I'm definitely going to have to find another quarterback there, especially if you didn't occupy a bench spot with a quarterback.
Yes, those quarterback injuries. We'll get into those a little bit during those games. Ben Roethlisberger going down, Drew Brees going down, some stuff to take care of there.
And Case Keenum also leading quarterbacks in scoring in the free agents in this 12-team league that I have here. So
interesting,
very viable option. Roster in only 5% of leagues.
Yeah, Case Keenum, that's not a bad one. They're definitely going to play from behind a lot. They play from behind almost the entire day on Sunday against Dallas. So if you're looking just at game script, Case Keenum's going to get volume.
Yeah, but I still think it's tough to kind of make a sweeping statement because, like, for example, Keenum's facing Chicago this week, so you obviously want to veer away from that. That's why, like, you always have to look at it as a weekly league rather than a year-long thing, unless you expect value from someone later on, like some of those sleeper picks in the draft.
Definitely good to keep in mind. Moving now to the Sunday games. First of the early slate of games, Bills beat the Giants 28-14. But that's not the biggest news coming out of this game. The biggest news is that Daniel Jones is getting the call. The era of Eli Manning has ended in New York. Mike, you and I are both Giants fans. That is, it's bittersweet to see him go. It's time to see him go. But rather than talk about what happened with the Giants during this game, how do you think the outlook for the Giants changes, if at all, with Daniel Jones under center?
You know, this is something that's going to be very difficult to quantify because, I mean, on one hand, the Giants don't necessarily have that much more talent all of a sudden join the team. I mean, Daniel Jones may be better than Eli or turn out to be better, but he still is a very raw product in NFL terms at this point. But on the other hand, you could see sort of the team, even though the talent may not change, just more of a will to go out there and put out a better performance with this new quarterback because they feel like something new is on the horizon rather than having Eli start week after week and them kind of just waiting for Daniel Jones to come around as the team is piling up losses, which is what's happened so far this season.
Yeah, definitely. Jones obviously is in the younger. He's a bigger arm than Eli Manning. So Evan Ingram might get some more work downfield. Was only limited to 48 receiving yards this week. And let's also remember Sterling Shepard is supposed to be back out of the concussion protocol this week. And Golden Tate comes back week 5 after a suspension for violating the NFL's drug policy has been fulfilled. So the answer to that question might actually not come for a couple weeks.
It's true. And, you know, I'm kind of heavily invested in Ingram across my league. So it's kind of a little scary to see those pieces coming back sort of. And I think other than Shepard, I wouldn't necessarily put a lot of fantasy stock in the other Giants wide receivers aside from Ingram and Shepard, who is coming back. So it is kind of disappointing to see that these targets are probably going to get spread out a little bit more for the current fantasy owners of Giants receivers.
So now flipping to the other side of this game, the Bills obviously did what they needed to do, took care of a bad New York football team. Mike, what do you think were some of the big things here? Not too much to talk about, though.
Yeah, I'd say it's ever since the departure of LaShawn McCoy, we kind of look at that backfield, seeing if anybody's going to be a clear bell cow or somebody who should have a lot of fantasy value or be a consistent fantasy starter. That question's probably going to be put off for another week here. But we did get good performances from both Gore and Singletary, even though neither one of them kind of emerged as the lead back. Gore had 19 rushes for 68 yards and a touchdown. Also notable, he only had like a long rush of 9 yards. So that shows that he is kind of going to be this back that is going to be taking the rush downs when teams are expecting them to rush, and not necessarily breaking out for a lot of long runs, but still getting those carries. And then we have Singletary also getting in the end zone, but being a little bit more efficient in the rushing game, 6 attempts for 57 yards and a touchdown.
I do wish they gave Singletary a little more room to work with. Especially in a game like this, where they had it in control, and they could really go and let Devin Singletary put some work in, get some reps, just with the first team, figuring it out. They traded McCoy, I think, because they have faith in Devin Singletary. But honestly, the way they're playing Gore isn't conducive of a football team that's looking to develop its talent. Devin Singletary is obviously, to me, their best option at running back. Frank Gore is an Iron Man. Of course, he is set for the Hall of Fame. The future is Devin Singletary there. I really hope that they start using him sooner than later. Now for our second game, with the battle of two of the more intriguing quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray, for fantasy owners this season. Cardinals went to Baltimore and lost 23-17 to the Ravens. Mike, on the Cardinal side of the ball, what are you thinking here?
Yeah, so first of all, on the Cardinals side of the ball, you have David Johnson with a rather disappointing week. Only 7 rushing attempts for 14 yards, and then one reception for 0 yards. So not much on the David Johnson front. And of course, Larry Fitzgerald coming in another week, another big week for Larry. It's this guy doesn't age. 11 targets, 5 receptions for 104 yards. Just very impressive from Larry Fitzgerald, as should be expected, I guess, at this point.
Larry is great. I can't get enough of Larry Fitzgerald. Consummate professional. Another guy ticketed for the Hall of Fame. You mentioned David Johnson. Do you want to share David Johnson left that game for a period of time with a wrist injury? He did come back and return for the end of the game, and he is on track to start and be fully healthy off the injury report by Sunday, so not much to worry about there. But that is a bit of an explanation for why he had a tough day. Also going against the Baltimore run defense, going to be hard for even the top-tier running backs. On the Cardinal side, the other thing that I wanted to mention, Christian Kirk. We were expecting big things from him. Had a lackluster week 1 against the Lions. Broke out a little bit this week. 8 targets, 6 catches, 114 receiving yards. Big week for him. Larry Fitzgerald's still a security blanket, but if Christian Kirk can improve upon this, he could be looking at wide receiver 2 territory in the near future.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I think something we should say from this game, Kyler showing that he still can. He is going to be a force in the league. 25 completions and 40 attempts with 349 yards passing. Really, he didn't get anyone into the end zone. There were no passing touchdowns, but or on the Cardinals side at least. But I mean, it's showing that he can pass for significant yardage in the first 2 weeks.
On the subject of quarterbacks, let's move across the field now. Lamar Jackson. We saw him throw 5 touchdowns against the Dolphins last week. He threw for another 2, I believe, this week. Rushed for 1. Had over 250 passing yards, 120 rushing yards. Is he the Michael Vick incarnate? What's going on here? Do you believe, or is it just another case of he played 2 really bad defenses in the first 2 weeks, and we'll see how he moves on?
I mean, as good as it is to be a Lamar Jackson owner right now, if I was one, I would be scared. I mean, you see him beat up on 2 very weak defenses and rush for 120 yards this week, which kind of makes me a little queasy just because of the injury risk there. I mean, you saw Robert Griffin III, what happened to him after one very good year in Washington, just sort of the body breaking down. And you always have to wonder, is that going to happen sooner rather than later with Lamar Jackson? We just talked about Cam Newton, who sort of had the same thing happen to him. He came in as a rushing quarterback, but then he just sustained injury after injury. And as you said, he's injured this week as well, which kind of accounts for his lack of rushing performance. But with that in mind, you always have to be wary of a rushing quarterback, and that's why I have to say, if you're a Lamar Jackson owner, I would try to sell him right now as high as possible.
That is indicative of what's happening in my leagues. I don't know about you, Mike, but across all of my leagues today, the Lamar Jackson owner posted on the trading block that Lamar Jackson is available. That should tell you all you need to know about what people think about this guy. The one thing to share on Lamar Jackson, though, he is playing Kansas City this week. So another favorable matchup, another matchup that's going to lend itself to passing. And Mark Ingram is coming into the game a little bit banged up, so they might throw a little bit more, lean on Lamar Jackson some more. So if you're looking for a 1-week plug and play, maybe make a move for Lamar Jackson if you can get him at a discount. But I agree with you, Mike. Be worried about him moving forward long term.
And I should say, I also received a trade proposal for Lamar Jackson, which we could talk about a little bit. This is the league, I think, where I lost Roethlisberger, so it's extra bit of weight for me to find a quarterback. But it was Lamar Jackson and Melvin Gordon for Nick Chubb.
Okay, and you have Chubb, correct?
Yes.
All right, I'll give you my take before you tell me what you actually did. Personally,
Okay.
I wouldn't do that. Melvin Gordon, I don't think is going to return. And even if he does return, he's not going to be the focal point of that offense. Austin Eckler looks fantastic. Nick Chubb is only going to improve as the Browns improved, had a better day on the ground yesterday against the Jets in a bad game for New York. We'll get into that. Personally, I wouldn't take it. I think there's better options on the waiver wire for you.
No, I agree. I think I just think that the benefit I get from having Lamar Jackson over whoever's on the waiver wire isn't that large. And I also feel that you have this huge question mark in Melvin Gordon, whereas Nick Chubb is definitely a good option to have in my league.
Yeah, taking up a lot of risk there. The other thing I wanted to bring up from this game from the Ravens side, Mark Andrews, another big day. He finishes with 9 targets, 8 catches, 112 yards, and another touchdown. Mike, tight end's a thin position. Is Mark Andrews a tight end 1?
I definitely think so after this week. I mean, it's, as you said, very hard to find a good tight end. He's put up 2 solid weeks. He's got to be a tight end 1, own it every week.
Absolutely. I am actively trying to trade for him. There's one league where the guy that owns Mark Andrews also owns Travis Kelce. So I'm trying to do a hard sell on Mark Andrews there, try to get him at a discount because unfortunately, have OJ Howard. Moving on now, we have one of the bigger upsets of the game in Cincinnati. The Niners beat up on the Bengals 41-17. Mike, on the Niners side, we see the backfield a little bit. It's going to be a 3-headed timeshare with Tevin Coleman out. Matt Breida, 12 carries. Raheem Mostert, 13 carries. Jeff Wilson Jr., 10 carries. What are you thinking about the backfield, and what are you thinking about the receiving core with some of the news that came out there?
Yeah, very good questions. I think Mostert is probably the most appealing option to me, just because, like you said, he's in the 3-headed backfield when it comes to rushing attempts, but he does seem to be getting his fair share of targets. He was targeted 4 times this week and did put up 68 yards with those targets, 3 receptions, and a touchdown. So I do think that he's kind of going to be a bit more of a passing back, so that gives him a little bit of an edge over the others when they're equal in rushing attempts. But with that said, he did have a 39-yard rush, so that kind of a 39-yard catch, which kind of skewed his numbers upward a little bit, or at least his average numbers. And then I think Deebo Samuel is emerging as a really good option as well from the receiving side. He had 7 targets, 5 receptions for 87 yards and a touchdown. I think he is probably the Niners receiver that you're going to want to target at this point, even though I'm the guy who drafted Dante Pettis quite a bit, honestly, probably much more than I should have. I think that's kind of the way I see the rushing and receiving for the Niners working out.
Yeah, the receiving core, Dante Pettis. I'm sorry, Mike. That sucks. I was high on him coming in too, but the most action he got was as a quarterback. He had 1 pass and no catches. Dante Pettis should not be rostered, really in any format.
Quarterback rating of 118.8, though.
Hey, good for him. Maybe you know what? Maybe the Steelers will give him a call. The other thing I did want to mention about the 49ers, not an elite top-tier day from George Kittle. Only had, I believe it was 3 receptions for a couple yards. Don't overreact. We all thought he was due for some regression. This is a relatively tough matchup here against the Bengals. Some solid linebackers there. The game script lent itself more to the run. That's why you saw those 3 guys combined for 35 carries. Don't overreact to George Kittle. Still set it and forget it. You drafted him as a tight end 1. He's a tight end 1. And then now the Bengals side of the ball, very, very quickly. Not too many takeaways here. John Ross had another big day, but that was mostly because of a 66-yard passing touchdown on the final drive in garbage time. Don't know what to make of that too much. But more so for the Bengals, Joe Mixon was wildly inefficient. 17 yards on 11 carries. The injury seemed to affect him, and I'm not sure how to think about him going forward, especially with Zach Taylor passing the ball the way he does.
Let's not undersell Joe Mixon here. He also had 3 receptions for a grand total of 10 yards there, Bryce. Forgot about that with a long of 7. Yeah, very nervous about Joe Mixon. A lot of leagues, I went first pick James Conner, second pick Joe Mixon. Oof. So it's not looking too good for me. Oof. That's my 1-4 start here. But yes, I am a little bit nervous about Mixon 2 weeks in here. Kind of starting to panic about him a little bit, but at this point, his value is too low for you to kind of seek out a trade, so I'm just holding on to him at this point.
On the flip side, I do think he's a buy low candidate. This is really his floor, his basement, his rock bottom, coming off the injury. Not a lot of usage. I'd buy low if you can. You might as well take a flyer on a guy that is the bell cow on his team if you can get him pretty cheap. Mike, anything you want to say on Tyler Boyd, John Ross? Both of them eclipsing 100 yards, or pretty much just what you thought there. John Ross, 4 catches. Tyler Boyd, more of the focal point with 10 catches. Ross was the one that found the end zone.
Yeah, I think Boyd is definitely a decent receiving option to have. I mean, he had 10 targets, 10 receptions, averaged 12.2 yards per reception there. So I do think that he's kind of going to be a little bit of the safety blanket when it comes to receivers, where he's going to be kind of targeted a bit more than everyone else in sort of shorter yardage situations and see if he can break out a little bit. But in a PPR format, I'm very happy with having Tyler Boyd right now.
And one thing to note, Tyler Boyd is going to retain that kind of value even when A.J. Green comes back. Tyler Boyd's routes are different from A.J. Green's. A.J. Green is a route tree. That's going to overlap more with John Ross, so John Ross is going to lose value. Tyler Boyd is going to maintain that floor, in my opinion, and this is more of his ceiling, 22.2 PPR points without a score. So that's pretty good. Now on to what I'm going to call the most infuriating game of the day. I had 2 separate bets on this. I love the Chargers minus 1.5. Chargers end up losing in Detroit 13-10. This was just, the Chargers almost didn't want to win. They had 2 touchdowns called back, one from Justin Jackson, one from Austin Eckler due to holding penalties. Austin Eckler fumbled on the goal line. Backup field goal kicker, because Michael Badgley is still out, Ty Long. He missed 2 field goals. Simply put, the Chargers threw this game away. Any positives that you're taking from this?
I mean, if you're an Eckler owner, I still think you have to be happy. I mean, 17 rushing attempts for 66 yards. Not necessarily, that's 3.9 per carry, which isn't necessarily a lot, but he did get in the end zone. And then on the receiving end, you're kind of reaping the PPR benefits, 6 receptions for 67 yards. So I still really like having Eckler on a team at this point.
I agree with you. I have Eckler in one league. He did fumble on the goal line, but he fumbled on the goal line in preseason too, and they're still giving him touches there now. I wouldn't anticipate that to change. Honestly, I believe Eckler is doing so well, or well enough, that Melvin Gordon might not have the role that we think when he comes back, and Austin Eckler is going to have standalone value even if Melvin Gordon is there as a pass catcher. So Austin Eckler was a very good investment at his draft stock. The other thing I did want to mention here, Keenan Allen, 15 targets. 15. He's the guy. No Hunter Henry. Dontrell Inman didn't really play a role. Mike Williams had a huge catch down the sideline, but that was really it. Keenan Allen's Phillip Rivers' guy.
Yeah, Keenan Allen just all-reliable on this Chargers team. I have some shares in Mike Williams too, and that's not turning out too well.
No, not great. But if you're looking at Keenan Allen owners like me, he's a wide receiver 1. We talked about him in the opener. Not a sexy pick. He's a good pick. He will get you where you need to go. Other side of the ball, a lot to take here from the Lions. Some interesting stuff going on. Not the prettiest game. A little bit of an upside-down game for them. Kenny Galladay had a big day. TJ Hawkinson limited to only one catch after a 5-catch, 100-plus yard performance in Arizona. What are you thinking big picture with the Lions?
At the beginning of the season, I really liked Galladay as sort of being that wide receiver one who's very, very solid. And I think that this game kind of shows that he has that potential if he does remain the number one receiving option on the Lions. But with that, he did have a very week one performance, so he's been a little bit of a seesaw so far for Kenny Galladay. I'd wait to see exactly how well he performs in the next few weeks before calling him a bona fide wide receiver one, but I definitely think the potential for him to move up there is substantial.
Definitely. In my book, he's a wide receiver too, pretty firmly supplanted there. The Chargers secondary is not bad. Yes, Derwin James is out, but still, it's a good defense to contend with. And Kenny Galladay showed up. His touchdown catch was on a huge possession for them too, gave them the lead. So clearly Matthew Stafford trusts him enough to go to him in those key situations.
Yeah, and also Kerryon Johnson with a pretty good day, I'd say. 12 rushing attempts for 41 yards, but he really helped out in the passing game. We had 2 receptions for 47 yards, including a 36-yard touchdown reception.
Yes, big day there too. Nice to see Kerryon get some usage in the passing game too. We talked about that, Mike, with Theo Riddick being gone. So Kerryon is trending up, which is where you want him to go.
Yeah, and also I should say, Danny Amendola, rough week.
Tough week.
He was my waiver wire ad last week. 1 target for no yards. Not too good.
That's okay. TJ Hawkinson was my number 1 ad. So I think you and I both went 1 for 2 this week, which, all things being equal, not too bad. Sticking in the NFC North, one of our other divisional matchups here, one of now going to be 3 in a row. Vikings go to Green Bay and lose 21-16. On both sides of the ball, this was a running back show. I'm not sure who can stop Dalvin Cook anymore. 20 carries, 154 yards against a very good Packer front seven, and a touchdown. Conversely, Aaron Jones against a exceptional Viking front seven, 23 carries, 116 yards, and a score as well. And both contributed in the passing game too. Dalvin Cook, 3 receptions, 37 yards. Aaron Jones, 4 catches, 34 yards. Aaron Jones also did have 6 targets, so being used a little more than we thought. And Jamal Williams actually chipped in a touchdown too, which could have been Aaron Jones's, you never know. Either side of the ball here, talk about the running backs, talk about the receivers. What are you thinking from this game?
Yeah, first, I just want to say that fantasy football is a very fickle game. I mean, a lot of times I found myself in kind of the beginning of the second round trying to value Dalvin Cook versus Joe Mixon, and I saw them as just sort of interchangeable at the time. But now we just see that just how crazy this game can be, where Cook is all of a sudden taking off and Joe Mixon is just heading in the total reverse direction. Cook with 20 rushing attempts for 154 yards and a touchdown, and that's not even talking about his 3 receptions for 37 yards to add on to that. So it just really shows how difficult this game can be at times and how frustrating as well.
Mike, if you remember from the rankings primer, I called Dalvin Cook this year's Odell Beckham Jr. for running backs, and I said both Dalvin Cook and Odell Beckham Jr. have the best shot to finish number 1 at their position. And after this week, that's looking pretty good.
Patting your own back there, hubby.
Oh, a little bit. We all need some praise sometimes.
But moving past the Vikings rush offense, I do think you still got to wonder exactly where you're going to be getting from their receivers. I mean, Thielen seemed to have a bit of a bounce back week after a rough week 1, 5 receptions for 75 yards, but Diggs, 7 targets for only hauled in 1 reception. I'm sure you have a bit more to say on that one, though, B.
Yeah, Diggs, I do have a share of Diggs. He was supposed to be my wide receiver too. He's scaring me a lot. You said it, 7 targets, only had 1 catch. So that's already not great, but you could try that up to Kirk Cousins, Kit Balls, you never know. I watched this game, several drops for Stephon Diggs, a crucial drop on 3rd down. Stephon Diggs is scaring me a lot. The one thing to note, his 1 catch did go for 45 yards and a score, and he did have another touchdown called back on a questionable pass interference reversal on a Dalvin Cook pick, My mind didn't look like it, so Stephon Diggs might have had 2 touchdowns, but that was called back. But still, 1 out of 7, not great. Plus, he fumbled. Stephon Diggs is scaring me.
Yeah, I agree. You got to be skeptical about Stephon Diggs, but I mean, how do you approach this at this point if you're a Stephon Diggs owner? Because you're 2 weeks in, he's got basically his floor value. How do you evaluate that? Are you looking to deal him when he has his low price tag associated with him right now? Or are you just going to kind of hold your breath on him? How do you feel?
I'm not going to deal him just because I'm not going to get the value that I should for where I drafted him. At this point, I'd sooner just hold him on your bench. If you're in a league without flex spots, if you're with a league with flex spots, and not a flex viable player on your bench, he's definitely got upside there as a flex player. Just based on the usage alone and how poor Kirk Cousins was. Kirk Cousins, very, very bad. He only went 14 of 32 in the air. He's not a wide receiver 2 for me anymore until he proves that he can be. If you want just evidence of that, I sat him in I had 2 starting receivers and a flex. I sat him and played Brandon Cooks at my wide receiver 2 and Austin Eckler at my flex. So if that's what you need to know, that's what I'm doing there.
If Austin Eckler is your flex at this point, you're having a very good year.
Oh, very good year. That was huge for me, especially because I, too, have James Conner in that league, which we'll get to. Other side of the ball, real quick, with the Packer receivers. Any more clarity here? Davante Adams, another big day. He's the number 1. Now, the question this year always was MVS or Geronimo Allison. Not great days for either one. Allison, only 25 yards. Valdez-Scantling, only 19. Allison did manage to find the end zone. Mike, did you get any clarity here?
Not really, and it's always that end zone kind of potential that's going to get thrown up into the air each week, and that's probably what's going to wind up distinguishing Allison versus MVS at the end of the year. I should say at the end of each week, who's going to have more fantasy points is going to be the person who gets in the end zone if either one of them does. So that's always a very difficult sort of guessing game to play, and that's kind of where the risk-reward aspect of fantasy comes in. If you're willing to tolerate the risk of one of them not getting into the end zone, then, I mean, and they do, good on you, but if they don't, you could be looking at, like, for example, MVS with a total of, I think it's 4.9 PPR points this week.
The one thing to mention there, MVS had 6 targets, Allison had 5, and MVS had a tough matchup with Trey Waynes. Trey Waynes is one of the few corners that really matches up well against him. Trey Waynes is over 6 feet tall and runs pretty quickly, so Valdez-Scantling didn't have the best matchup there. I'm still leaning MVS over Geronimo Allison. I just like what MVS offers a little bit more, but definitely still have to monitor that situation. Sliding down south now, the AFC South going to Houston. Jaguars put up a good fight, but fall 1 point short. Texans defeat the Jaguars 13-12. Either side of the ball.
I think you misspoke there, Bryce. 1 foot short.
1 foot. That's
Leonard
true.
Fournette on that 2-point conversion attempt just came short of the goal line, which would have brought the Jaguars almost assuredly a victory in Houston.
Definitely. A little bit of a heartbreaker. At least, honestly, one positive I'm taking from this, we have a new personality in this league. Gardner Minshew, this guy is like Ryan Fitzpatrick meets Johnny Manziel. Just his persona is huge. So I like having this guy. He's a star in the making for Jacksonville, if that makes any sense.
Definitely makes sense.
I think probably the biggest take from this one is DJ Chark. We talked about him last week. Might be for real. Led the team in targets with 9 and catches with 7. Did get into the end zone on 55 receiving yards. Mike, you liked him last week. You liked Chris Conley as well. Conley did have another good week. Fewer catches but more yards, leading the Jaguars in yards. Fournette, active in the passing game too. So Gardner Minshew maybe making this team better.
Hang on, B. I think you missed one of the very important passing options on the Jaguars that you told everyone to go out and get late in the drafts.
Would that be Jeff Swaim?
Jeff Swaim, exactly. 3 receptions for a grand total of 14 yards there. I guess the absence of Nick Foles is really affecting Mr. Swaim.
You know what? Just as much as I like to pat myself on the back, got to bring yourself down a little bit too. Got to be humble. Jeff Swain was not a good pick.
That's what friends are for.
Thanks, Mike. Um, Texan side. What I thought was the biggest thing here, Carlos Hyde, 20 touches. Duke Johnson, 6.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely kind of the one thing that I took away from this. And Carlos had 20 touches for 90 yards, and his longest was only 14. So you don't get sort of a jump in efficiency from that. I mean, he averaged 4.5 solid yards per carry. So I definitely, I mean, that kind of late in the offseason acquisition of Hyde is really something that the Texans are apparently going to focus on. So I say if you can acquire Hyde, probably go out and do it. But then again, his price tag is probably going to be much higher now after this very good week. Very frustrating game still. Very frustrating.
Definitely. Carlos Hyde, I picked him up in one of my leagues. I was looking for an end of the bench guy. I thought he was a good upside pick. I'd be comfortable starting him in standard leagues once bye weeks come around. Probably not before then, but I love the usage. I have a friend of mine who's a 49ers fan, and he used to lovingly refer to Carlos Hyde as a potato. I think it's safe to say now, Carlos Hyde, potato, no longer. He looked pretty good. Mike, my one question coming from this game, though, is Kiki QT rosterable? 4 targets, 2 catches, 7 yards.
This is a really tough one. If he is, he's definitely on the back end of the roster, kind of just as maybe he'll break out later in the year. But I mean, you have 4 people with more sort of more of a bang in the passing game this week. DeAndre Hopkins, Will Fuller, Kenny Stills, and Mr. Akins with 2 receptions. All had more, at least as many receptions and definitely more yards than Mr. Kute.
Yeah, I think you can drop him. Kenny Stills is looking to be more a friend of Deshaun Watson's than Kiki QT is.
Mm-hmm.
Now for the big blowout, what everyone expected. Pats, 43. Dolphins, 0. There isn't much to come from this game other than a little bit of news on the Dolphins side. Minkah Fitzpatrick traded to Pittsburgh for a first-round pick, and reports are Kenyon Drake is on the block. So for those of you, including Mike, who Amir and I told to drop Kenyon Drake last week, I might want to keep him now. If he gets moved, he'll have value.
Yeah, I mean, I have, I think, 1 or 2 shares of Kenyon Drake. And it's kind of one of those difficult things to try to decide on. Personally, I might go out there and just see what he's going to get in the trade market. But if you're not getting much value, you could definitely put him on his bench and hope that he gets into a better environment, because it just seems like even though he's the lead back on this Dolphins team, he's just really not getting anywhere, especially with the fact that they're almost assuredly down at least 20 points at halftime in every one of their games.
Mike, did you see the video of Kalen Ballage actually ducking out of the way of a pass?
No, I did not. I was too busy watching the college football player get launched 9 feet in the air.
Oh, the guy go with the little helicopter on the sideline.
Yes.
That was crazy. But yes, Kalen Ballage literally ducked out of the way. That should tell you all you need to know about the state of the Dolphins. On the Patriots side, a little bit of news. Some allegations have come out against Antonio Brown. He was at practice today, so until anything further comes, it appears that AB is going to play. Seemed to have a connection with Tom Brady, 8 targets, 4 receptions, 56 yards, and a touchdown. Until further notice, I think AB, I don't know what you think, Mike, I think AB is a wide receiver 1, and Julian Edelman now is a low-tier wide receiver 2, only had 4 targets.
I don't know how you can just refer to Tom Brady in passing like that. You have to say something like Tom Brady, the greatest of all time, Tom Brady, TB12, Tom Brady, just the man, period. But however you want to refer to him, definitely did find a connection with Antonio Brown, who was the leading receiver for the Pats this week. 8 targets, 4 receptions for 56 yards, and a very nice touchdown catch. So I do think he's probably is a wide receiver 1, and I would drop Edelman to a wide receiver 2 at this point. But I mean, it's sort of like the situation on the Packers a little bit, where it's just going to be whoever Tom Brady kind of prefers. Although I think these two wide receivers are of higher caliber than MVS and Geronimo Allison. I think you're going to have just kind of the boom or bust potential each week on either one of these guys, but I do think that the floor for both of them is a bit higher.
Definitely would agree.
And I should also say, Sonny Michel with a very nice week, 21 rushing attempts for 85 yards and a touchdown. So Michel owners are very happy, but hard to take a lot away from beating the Dolphins.
Yeah, really the only thing to take from this game, the Dolphins really are that bad. I don't see any way they're going to win a game unless they do have a game against the Giants. They could pull one out there.
Yes, they do.
Now for one of the more sad games to watch. A lot of injuries going on here. Seahawks 28, Steelers 26. We'll get into the fantasy takes, but first, Big Ben out for the season with an elbow injury. James Conner leaves midway through with an injury. He should be relatively okay going into Sunday, but still a situation to monitor. Mike, this is killer. And how does Mason Rudolph instead of Big Ben affect Juju Smith-Schuster and James Washington?
I mean, and Vance McDonald. Can't forget about Vance McDonald, who I thought at least was a decent tight end one, or low end tight end one, I should say. But it's going to be tough going forward. I mean, I think what is a positive sign is that the Steelers did trade for Minkah Fitzpatrick yesterday, from the Dolphins. Which shows that they do want to win, and they trade a first-round pick, I should say, as well for Fitzpatrick. So that shows that they do want to win this year, and that gives me a little bit more faith in the fact that they really are going to put their best foot forward with Mason Rudolph in as QB. But other than that, I mean, I could see Smith-Schuster dropping all the way to a wide receiver 2 kind of flex play at this point almost. I'm a little scared by what we're going to see in the coming weeks, but at this point, it's just kind of one of those, you got to hold on to him and just hold your breath going forward because, I mean, you're definitely not going to get as much value as you should at this point for Juju. And I should say the same for McDonald, but you might be able to find a better matchup wide receiver or tight end rather on a week-to-week basis than McDonald.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't drop Juju that far yet. Rudolph actually looked pretty good in relief, going 12 of 19, 112 yards, 2 scores and an interception. I would actually raise James Washington because of this. Washington, remember, worked with Mason Rudolph. Rudolph was his quarterback in college, both at Oklahoma State. They were pretty good together. So we'll see how that plays out. Rudolph, I think, is going to be better than people are worried about for right now. Seahawks side of the ball, couple really good things to see. DK Metcalf finds the end zone. Will Dissly finds the end zone twice. And Tyler Lockett comes back with a vengeance after only a 1-catch, 2-target performance. 12 targets, 10 receptions, 79 yards. Big day for Lockett, big day for Dissly. What do you think? Do you believe in Will Dissly?
I mean, it's tough. I still pump the brakes as hard as possible on the Seahawks passing game because I just don't think there are that many targets to go around. With that said, very promising for Lockett owners to see him get 12 targets and 10 receptions this week. But also kind of the downside to that, didn't get into the end zone because Metcalf got into the end zone and Dissly got into the end zone twice, which shows that in the red zone, they may be looking at other options than Tyler Lockett, which kind of knocks your upside on Lockett on a week-to-week basis down a bit because he's not going to get in the end zone. Yeah,
that was something expected, though, given that Tyler Lockett is smaller, DK Metcalf. Huge receiver. He'll be used there more. But that is a concern. Lockett, though, in my book, firmly a wide receiver 2 after a performance like this.
And also, I think Chris Carson, even though it was a decent game for the Seahawks, Carson really didn't have a fantastic game. Just sort of average for him. 15 rushing attempts for 60 yards. Didn't get into the end zone, and then just 3 catches for 27 yards.
And we should mention, Rashad Penny outplayed him on fewer carries. Mike, I think you have the stats up in front of you. He had 10 carries for more yards. Rashad Penny looked pretty good. This performance, Mike, making you look pretty good, being further down Chris Carson than Almer was.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, but it's tough. It's tough. But yes, totally agree with you, B.
Yes. Going back now to the AFC South, Colts in a nail-biter beat the Titans 19-17. Not a lot to take away from here. Fairly bland and boring game. Mike, what are your thoughts?
All right, Colts Titans. First thing I have to say, Marlon Mack with a very inefficient performance, 20 attempts for just 51 yards. That's an average of 2.6. I mean, the good of that is that he is getting those rushing attempts, but the bad is that kind of inefficient. And Wilkins, on the other hand, their other running back, had 5 attempts for 82 yards with a long of 55 yards. So he is sort of being a little bit more efficient. Meanwhile, T.Y. Hilton with a touchdown reception, which is very nice for T.Y. Hilton owners, getting him into double-digit points. Ebron, 3 receptions for 25 yards, but did get into the end zone. So I do think that you get a little bit from the passing attack there. Kind of can T.Y. Hilton owners can sort of hang their head high at this performance.
Yeah, you hit most of that for the Colts. One thing to mention, T.Y., oddly enough, exactly half as productive as last week. 4 catches, 43 yards, and 1 score, compared to 8 catches, 87 yards, and 2 scores last week. Just a fun little anecdote there from 2 stat heads like me and you.
Good math. Good math. Keep it going.
Other side, Titans. Corey Davis at least puts together some yards. 5 targets, 3 catches, 38 yards, but still largely an underproduction from him. But more on, for me, from this game, Derrick Henry, I've changed my tune. I think he's a wide receiver, running back 2, 5.4 yards per carry on 15 totes. He looks pretty good.
This makes us look really dumb, B. We had him maybe as a round 3, round 4.
Mm-hmm.
He may if the draft was occurred today, he may slide into round 2 at this rate.
I agree.
He seems to be a very solid RB1/RB2 option.
I agree, and he seems to be much more game script proof than we thought. The Titans were tied or down for most of this game against the Colts, and Derrick Henry still got the ball. There's something to be said there. That might be more on Marcus Mariota's ineffective passing, though.
Yeah, I definitely think that's fair.
All right. Moving on to yet another division game and the final of the early games. Cowboys defeat the Redskins 31-21. Cowboys side, Dak. Dak might be the real deal. 26 of 30, 269 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. Zeke looked good too. Big news from the Cowboys side, though. Michael Gallup goes down with an injury. He will be out a few weeks.
Yeah, that's very disappointing, especially considering that he got the more targets than any other receiver in this game. He hauled in 6 of his 8 targets for 68 yards. So that's a very disappointing note there for Gallup owners. But even though it's bad for them, Cobb is a much more viable option, especially if you see him on the waiver wire. And Cooper and Witten owners should be much happier about that.
Definitely. It's good to see Zeke back in true form again. Mike, is Dak Prescott a set it and forget it QB1?
B, you ask all the hard questions. 26 of 30, hard to get more efficient than that with 3 touchdowns and a pick. I mean, like I said sort of at the beginning with dealing with other quarterback questions, you were asking about Cam Newton. I think you just got to play it week to week. Is there somebody on the waiver wire with a better matchup? It's just because, as you say, a lot depends on game script and a lot depends on matchup and passing defense. And he did this against the Redskins, which, you could put a little asterisk next to that performance.
Yep, you got it with that last comment there. I'm still not.
Oh, it's a trick question.
A little bit. I'm still not sold on Dak being QB1. He did this against the Giants and the Redskins. I'm not ready to buy. But speaking of buying, on the Redskins side, really the only piece of news to talk about other than AP really having it back in the swing of things, only 2.5 yards per carry, 25 yards on 10 carries. Are you buying or selling Terry McLaurin at this point? Another good performance, finds the end zone on 5 receptions.
I mean, I think the bigger question is just, are you buying into the Redskins' passing offense? Because they don't really have all that many options. And if you are buying into their passing offense, then I think you definitely buy into McLaurin. But I'd say wait and see a little bit more. But, I mean, what are your thoughts, B?
I'm buying. We'll get into this in a bit, but Terry McLaurin is one of my waiver wire pickups. The guy had 9 targets, 5 catches, 62 yards, and a score. Big day against the Eagles last week. Those are division games. Those are hard games to play in for anyone even if the Cowboys secondary isn't fantastic. Case Keenum's got to go somewhere with the ball. He seems to have a connection with Terry McLaurin. If Dwayne Haskins does start at some point this season, that might actually help him. They both played together at Ohio State. I'm definitely buying what Terry McLaurin is selling.
Yeah, and I think you got to make a little bit of an amendment to your previous statement. You said division games are always tough, but I think that's just not true for the Patriots.
Well, I think that's true for anyone. Yeah, I'll give you that. Anyone that's not the Patriots, that is just a brutal division. Terrible, terrible division. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't lose a game in that division the next 5 years. Tom Brady is going to be 80 and winning games in that division.
The Bills seem to beat up on every other quote-unquote New York franchise, though.
Oh, it's the Bills state now.
It's true.
That's it for the early games. Sliding now to the later games. Chiefs, Raiders, yet another division game here. Chiefs win 28-10. Big news coming into this game was no Tyreek Hill. How would they fare? No Hill, no problem. Patrick Mahomes is otherworldly. Mike, I think it's already fair to say, for me, he's the best quarterback I've ever seen just from a pure talent standpoint. And once he gets more experience, he'll only get better. Demarcus Robinson, 6 catches, 172 yards, 2 touchdowns. Mecole Hardman, 4 catches, 61 yards, and a touchdown. Travis Kelce had a touchdown. And Mecole Hardman had a 71-yard touchdown called back due to a holding penalty. This passing offense is unbelievable. I want as many shares of it as I can.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. And I do have to say, I was looking a little scary there for the Chiefs. They were down 10-0 to the Raiders out of the first quarter. But then Mahomes came back with a record-breaking second quarter, I think throwing for the most passing yards by a quarterback in a quarter in the last 40 years, if I have that stat correctly. Just an insane second quarter from Patrick Mahomes. That was all the scoring that was needed. He put up 4 touchdowns there, and the Chiefs, I should say, put up 4 touchdowns, all passing touchdowns, so Mahomes got credit for all of them in that second quarter. Just an absurd passing offense here, B. I think you're totally hit the nail on the head. Travis Kelce, 9 targets, 7 receptions, 107 yards, showing that he probably was worth a bit of an earlier pick, at least from this game. But we shall see later on in the year if he is phased at all.
Yeah, Patrick Mahomes is just otherworldly. For the Chiefs, though, one thing to note in the backfield, McCoy, after having a very good week 1, not a great week 2. 11 carries for only 23 yards in a positive game script game for him. 3 targets, 3 catches, so good in PPR, but 0 yards. So not much in the way of the passing game. Have you cooled off on LeSean McCoy at all?
I mean, I would be very cooled off on LeSean McCoy, except for the fact that Damian Williams was actually a little bit worse in the rushing game, at least, with 9 attempts for a grand total of 8 yards. And then on the receiving end, Williams had 5 targets, 3 receptions for 48 yards. So Williams does appear to be more of the passing back, and McCoy seems to be getting a few more of the totes in this offense. So I think that's something to adjust for, whether your league is standard versus PPR and how you value these two.
Yep, this is going to be a passing team. Other side of the ball, not a lot to touch on. Josh Jacobs looked pretty good in negative game script. 12 carries, 99 yards. Didn't get a target, though, in the passing game, which was somewhat unfortunate. But, Mike, the one question I do want to hit you with now. Darren Waller, 7 targets, 6 catches, 63 yards. Didn't find the end zone, but still a lot of usage. Is Darren Waller a tight end 1, or is he at least startable?
Oh, great question, B. So happy you asked. Matthew Berry, I think, in his draft day manifesto, kept touting Darren Waller. I'm in a relatively deep, I think, 12-team league where we have like 3 wide receiver positions and 2 flexes, large roster. I took Darren Waller in like the second to last round, and somebody replied, "Who is that?" And now it gives me great pride to see Mr. Waller put up these numbers. As you said, 7 targets, 6 receptions for 63 yards. I do think he's definitely getting into the wide receiver, tight end 1, I should say, category. And I should say maybe even mid-tier wide receiver 1, because he is just getting a lot of targets in that offense, which wasn't necessarily expected by a lot of people, including my league mate, I have to say. So I definitely think that he is a wide receiver 1, a tight end 1 option. But I mean, as we saw before, tight ends are a bit fickle with as we saw with George Kittle.
Mike, I'm trying to trade for him everywhere. Everywhere. I am so big on Darren Waller right now. I was very low on him, unlike Matthew Berry. That's why Matthew Berry does what he does. Uh, he's been great. I'm trying to trade for him anywhere I can get him.
Totally agree.
For the exciting game of week 2, in Denver, the Bears 16, the Broncos 14, Chicago. We have kickoff. Eddie Pinheiro erases the memory of Cody Parkey hitting a game winner in the altitude in Denver. But the Bears did not look very good. Mitchell Trubisky just has not taken a step forward. Anthony Miller, 1 target, 1 catch, 2 yards. Do you have any positives from this game other than the Bears have found a kicker?
Yeah, Mike Davis had a great game. 3 attempts for 1 yard. No, but in all seriousness, I think David Montgomery, he is getting a lot of the rushing attempts, but definitely wasn't all that efficient, which is a bit scary. 18 attempts for 62 yards and a touchdown. The touchdown is kind of the saving grace there if you're a Montgomery owner, especially because he's not really getting involved in the passing game where he had 1 catch for 6 yards. But I mean, it's not like his counterpart was very active in the passing game, as Tariq Cohen only had 2 receptions for 7 yards.
I saw this as a massive, massive step forward for David Montgomery, just in terms of usage. 18 carries. Matt Nagy committing to the run. They won in large part because of that, because they committed to the run. David Montgomery's getting his due, and yes, not the most efficient, only 62 carries, did find the 62 yards, did find the end zone. But to me, he just was a grinder this game. I think he endeared himself to that coaching staff with his performance, especially in the altitude. It is hard to play in Denver on the road. Moving to the Denver side, anything big here outside of Royce Freeman outproducing Philip Lindsay, both on the ground and in the air?
I mean, I think he outproduced him, but it's hard to say that he had one of those games where he absolutely just sort of lapped Philip Lindsay. I mean, Freeman had 11 rushing attempts. Lindsay had 13. Granted, Freeman was much more efficient with 4.9 yards per carry, and Lindsay with only 2.8. But I do think a lot of that could be just because people expect a rush when Lindsay's in the game, whereas if Freeman's in the game, they may be looking for more of a passing down. And as you said, Freeman did. He got as many targets as Lindsay, but made more of them. He tallied 18 more yards than Lindsay in the pass game. So I definitely think that this is one of those frustrating scenarios if you drafted Philip Lindsay relatively high. Just because, I mean, now he's in this sort of timeshare where on a week-to-week basis you have to just kind of try to decide whether he's worth a start based on how much activity you think Freeman's going to get.
Yeah, my big takeaway there is similar to you. From what it sounds like, it seems like you think you're not going to start either one of those two very reliably. I agree with you, if that is what you're saying. I'll even take that a step further. I think the only guy worth thinking about starting on this Denver offense is Emmanuel Sanders. 11 catches, 98 yards, and a score.
I would agree with that, but I mean, if you're in a 20-team league, I definitely think you have to start one.
Yes.
That's why I don't like broad sweeping statements.
League dependent here. Phil Lindsay still flex capable, but there are better options in more what we'll call normal leagues, 10 and 12 team leagues.
For sure.
Now for the final 4 p.m. game, or 4 p.m. Eastern game, last of the day games. More sad news here. Saints downed by the Rams in an emotional playoff rematch, 27-9 in favor of the Rams. The biggest news here, though, Drew Brees injures his thumb. Really sad footage. Couldn't grip a football after. He's going to be out a minimum of 6 weeks. Teddy Bridgewater is going to play instead. How does this affect the Saints?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I have to say is that Kamara also did not have a very good game. 13 rushes for 45 yards and only 1 catch for 15 yards. So that kind of makes me a little bit more concerned just about the Saints offense as a whole. I mean, Drew Brees is one of the faces of the league. He's just year in, year out put up just an incredible amount of passing yards. So it's going to be hard to expect the same amount of performance, I'd say. So I think Michael Thomas owners and Alvin Kamara owners should be a little bit disappointed. But on the other hand, I do think that it's not all hope is lost here for the Saints. They are very talented, and I don't think their offense will all of a sudden come to a total stop.
Yeah, I'm going to downgrade both Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara to now mid-tier running back and wide receiver one, rather than high upside, high end wide receiver one, running back one. I do think this affects Kamara more than it does affect Michael Thomas. Oddly enough, Kamara might see more stacked boxes. Also, Teddy seemed to have a little bit of a connection with Michael Thomas. Thomas had 13 targets, 10 catches, 89 yards, so still 18.9 points in full point PPR, 13.9 at half point. So honestly, Michael Thomas I think still going to be fine. Kamara might have just had a bad day. Let's not overreact to Teddy Bridgewater. Let's remember that at one point he was the future in Minnesota, so he does have some pedigree.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. But at the same time, I mean, it's difficult to just sit in there with, like, if you have, say, a Kamara or a Thomas and you're 0-2, say, in your fantasy season this far. It's difficult to make that decision, but I do think in the long run, it is probably best for you to hold on to Kamara, definitely hold on to Thomas, and don't sell them while they're low at this point.
Yes, some unfortunate circumstances.
Yeah.
Rams side, some interesting stuff going on with the wide receiver core. Brandon Cooks does have a bounce back week, finds the end zone, had a huge 57-yard catch on, I believe it was the Rams' first play from scrimmage. But what seems to be interesting here is, will there always be one receiver who's the odd man out? Last week it was Cooks who had a down week. This week Robert Woods has a down week. Cooper Kupp was consistent across both. Mike, can Jared Goff feed all three guys each week?
I mean, it's tough. It's a very tough decision. I think that Kupp seems to actually be one of the more reliable in this receiving core.
I would agree.
So I definitely think if you have him, he's an absolute kind of definitely start as a wide receiver 2 or a flex play every week. But the other two, I mean, we were thinking Robert Woods could be as high as a wide receiver 1 at times. But I mean, with a week like this, you have to start questioning that.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of it. Obviously, if you have any of the three, you start all three just because of what they can do. Also, if this is Robert Woods' floor and if last week was Brandon Cooks' floor, it's still not terrible. And you'll assume that these floors are about as low as the floors are going to go. Cooper Kupp, more than the other two. I agree with you, Mike, is probably the highest of all three. Now that we know the ACL is not affecting him, Jared Goff loves him in the end zone. He had that, I don't know if you saw it, that huge catch and run on Sunday. Many, many yards, outran several Saint defenders. Just a great all-around football play from Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, I should say, and this is also one of the things, if you drafted Cooks or Woods at this point, I mean, odds are you drafted them higher than Kupp. You're just looking into the sky and wondering, just how could I have made that decision? Because Kupp is just turns out to be like this real force. And just to give you an idea of how interchangeable Cooks and Woods are, I was watching this game in my friend's backyard, and I was kind of like paying a little bit of attention to it because I have Robert Woods, and there was that Cooks touchdown, and I was like, oh, great, Woods got into the end zone. And then I heard somebody else like yell from another yard, oh yeah, and I swear he said Woods. But of course it was Brandon Cooks who got into the end zone, not Robert Woods. So very frustrating there if you are a Woods owner to see Cooks and Kupp have these really good weeks, whereas you're just kind of sitting there with really, really kind of, even though you try to defend it, not a great performance.
Now, since Mike, you and I are recording on Tuesday night, we will be able to get both primetime games in here. So the Sunday night game first. Falcons in a really exciting fourth quarter defeat the Eagles at home 24-20. Either side of the ball, what are your main takeaways here?
I think my main takeaways, first of all, are that Miles Sanders seems to be the running back that you want in the Philadelphia backfield as opposed to Jordan Howard, who they acquired in the offseason. As he put up, he got more rushing attempts than Jordan Howard. He had 10 attempts. Howard only had 8. but he's also much more active in the passing game with 3 receptions, granted for only 9 yards, but they do seem to be using him much more than Howard in the passing game, and also are giving him more totes, which he almost kind of maybe elevated into that bell cow territory potentially for the Eagles going forward if they do kind of take touches away from Howard.
That might be a little premature on bell cow, but I do agree.
That's fair.
I do agree, particularly with Jordan Howard should not be on your team. Miles Sanders should. Some injury news, though. Alshon Jeffrey left this game in the first quarter without a reception. The word is still we're not sure what the outlook is. We don't know if he'll play this week, if he won't play this week. But if he misses time, Mike, who's going to step up? Last week, it was Nelson Aguilar, 11 targets, 8 catches, 107 yards, and a touchdown for the slot guy. Will it be Aguilar again, or will it be J.J. Arcega-Whiteside?
Yeah, I think Aguilar is definitely the person that they're going to be targeting, and also I think Zach Ertz is still going to get his receptions. I mean, he had 16 targets this week, which is very positive for a tight end.
Yes, good to see Zach Ertz act as a tight end 1. Definitely has a connection with Carson Wentz.
Yeah, and I should say, I think Miles Sanders, not a bell cow, but I just mean that he's definitely seeing more touches than Jordan Howard at this point.
Yes. Other side of the ball. Some negative here. Devontae Freeman, only 22 yards and 11 carries, but some positives as well. We talked about the Rams, a lot of mouths to feed. Could they do it? The Falcons are showing that it is possible. Julio Jones, 10 targets, 5 catches, 106 yards, 2 touchdowns, including a monster touchdown on a screen pass to take the lead. And Calvin Ridley, also 10 targets, 8 catches, 105 yards, and a score. Both these guys had comparable weeks, same amount of targets. Julio Jones had literally 1 more yard. Matt Ryan seems to be able to feed both these guys. Where do you have Calvin? So Julio Jones obviously set it and forget it. Is Calvin Ridley a wide receiver too?
I mean, we really should be thinking about the Mohamed Sanu owners here. He had 4 receptions for 16 yards, of which I have at least 1 share in Mr. Sanu. But aside from that, I do think that Calvin Ridley has that wide receiver 2 potential in a given week for sure. But I think it's still, I wouldn't say that he's just a start guy no matter what. Still think about the matchup a little bit. Start at least in a wide receiver 2 spot. I think you can have him flex or better each week, I'd say, but there may be some wide receivers on your bench that are on a matchup to matchup basis.
Yep, I would agree. Julio, obviously, now that's 3 touchdowns for him. He seems to be breaking that trend of his where he doesn't score.
Yeah, although I should say that the Eagles' defense isn't bad by any stretch, so that's promising.
Yes, some good signs there. And now the final game of the week, Monday night, the Browns in Odell Beckham's glorious return to MetLife Stadium defeat the Jets 23-3. Before we get into really anything here, Sam Darnold now is shooting for a Week 5 return from mononucleosis, but Trevor Siemian got the start. He lasted, roughly 10 minutes. Gruesome injury. He left the game, and now third-string quarterback Luke Falk in his second year in the league, already on his 3rd team. He comes in, takes over at QB, 20 of 25, 198 yards. Not great, but certainly respectable. We'll start with the Jets here. How does this affect the Jets, particularly guys like Le'Veon Bell, Robbie Anderson, and Jamison Crowder?
I mean, they just keep getting worse and worse quarterback. I think also Simeon is now out for the year. So they'll have to at least play the next game with Falk or someone that they pick up, although I think they're planning to go into the game starting Falk at this point. But I don't think Le'Veon Bell's value is hurt all that much. If they lean on their rushing attack more, then Bell owners are just going to get more rushing yards. Maybe a little worse in a PPR format for Bell owners. But aside from that, I do think Le'Veon Bell is still a solid RB1, maybe now a mid-tier RB1. As you said, you were thinking about moving maybe Kamara. But I still think I start Kamara over Bell most weeks. But Robbie Anderson, Jamison Crowder, I was never personally all that high on these 2 guys and this Jets offense as a whole. But I think now you really have to think hard about other options on your team before starting any one of them. And if there is a guy you like on the waiver wire, I could potentially see dropping them, but I would definitely go with a little bit of caution before outright dropping either one of them.
Mike, I'm going to disagree with you on one comment, but only slightly. I actually think Luke Falk is going to help Le'Veon Bell. His line from this game, 10 targets, 10 receptions, 61 yards. I mean, and that's just in the air. He had a big day on the ground, too. Luke Falk was looking for him. I think this helps Le'Veon Bell. But with regard to the receivers, I wouldn't drop either one of them, particularly not Anderson. Anderson seemed to have a good rapport with Luke Falk. Six targets, 4 catches, 81 yards. That being said, wouldn't really start either one with any kind of confidence.
Yeah, and I mean, the problem there is that you're really not going to have that much upside with them. Even when Donald comes back, I don't see him all of a sudden throwing for 400 yards week over week. So I think it's just kind of like, yeah, they have a decent floor, but their ceiling really isn't that high for both Anderson and Crowder, I would say.
Yeah. Mike, we got to talk about...
But I think that point on Bell is very smart, though, because I could potentially see with Falk in the game now them going for sort of shorter passing opportunities, which in a PPR league is very beneficial for Bell owners.
Definitely. Mike, we have to talk about Odell Beckham Jr. Obviously played with a lot of fire in this one, return to MetLife. Made some questionable comments after the game, talking about the Giants organization with a bit of a backhand. But OBJ...
He just have to jinx you this time.
Oh, gosh. But OBJ, I know I was touting him as we talked about this with Dalvin Cook. The best chance to finish number one at his position, save for maybe DeAndre Hopkins. He showed that. 10 targets, 6 catches, 161 yards, and a touchdown. A massive touchdown on just – he found a hole up the seam a little bit on a short route and took it to the house. We had an upgrade and a bounce back week from Baker Mayfield. Still not what we hoped for, only 19 of 35 against the bad Jet team. 325 in the air, though. A touchdown to OBJ and a pick. Mike, 2 questions here. Is OBJ the best receiver in fantasy right now? And is Baker Mayfield a reliable QB1 after what you saw yesterday, excuse me.
Very tough questions, as always, as to be expected from you, B. But I'd say Odell Beckham is not a wide receiver 1. If you ask me right now, I'd rather have DeAndre Hopkins on my team or Julio Jones for sure. Maybe we could throw a few other wide receivers in there. I do think Michael Thomas is probably below Beckham at this point. But, I mean, with that said, Beckham is a very good option. I mean, 6 receptions for 161 yards. But you also have to realize that 89 of those yards did come from that slant play, which Beckham does a lot. He just is very good at taking those slants to the house. But, I mean, kind of feeding into the Mayfield answer, Mayfield threw for 325 yards, but 89 of those were on one play, which basically comes from the explosiveness of his receiver. So that, I say, maybe discounts his yardage a little bit. Whether or not you think that's fair I could see objections to it either way. But I do think that I am happy. If I'm a Mayfield owner, I'm definitely very happy at this point because it's showing that he does have the potential to have these very nice games. But I also have to realize that, and that is to say he had a lot of upside going forward, but you also have to realize that I think Mayfield also does have a floor that people don't talk about, but I do think it's pretty low if you go up against a very good defense.
Yeah, Mike, just before closing out on the game recap before going to the waiver wire, 4 guys that I kind of view as the same tier of quarterback. Baker Mayfield, Matt Ryan, Russell Wilson, Carson Wentz. How would you rank those 4 as it stands right now?
Wilson's at the bottom. I like I said, just not very high on the Seahawks passing offense. You said Goff was in there, Matt Ryan, and Mayfield were the other 3?
Wentz, not Goff.
Oh, Wentz, rather.
We can throw Goff in there too, though. Goff is a good ad.
I'd still probably put Goff over Wilson. And then I think I'd go Matt Ryan at the 1, Carson Wentz number 2, Baker at 3.
That's exactly how I would do it. Wentz, except I'd flip those bottom 2. I'd go Wentz 1. Ryan 1, Wentz 2, Baker 3, Wilson 4, and Goff 5.
Yeah,
but definitely that's a bit of a downgrade on Baker. where he was being taken as QB4 coming into the year.
Yeah, and I think, but that's kind of on their average performance. I could very easily see a world where Baker just kind of blows those other 4 out of the water.
Yes, could happen. He can always take that step forward. He might be the most talented passer of all of those guys. It's just a matter of whether or not he can do it week in, week
As we
out.
say in stats, though, that's a tail outcome.
Yes, the tail outcome. That's it for the recap. And now for the end of the show, if you watched us last week, listened to us last week, we thank you for coming back again. But for those of you who didn't, just a quick preview for what we're going to do now.
And just to be clear, not those who didn't come back because they're not listening. It's the newbies. We love you, the newbies.
We love everybody on this show.
Anybody who made it to this point.
What we're going to do now is talk about our top waiver wire pickups for this week. Everyone that we're going to mention is under 50% owned on ESPN leagues. So right now what we're trying to do is help the majority of our listeners figure out who they're looking for. So we're trying to pick guys that are available in the majority of leagues. Usually how this works is Mike, Amer, and I will each give 2. Since Amer couldn't make it today, Mike and I will each give our top 3. So, and there's going to be a rapid fire, no real analysis, just the guy we're highlighting here, and then 1 or 2 sentences why we think that player is a good ad for this week. So without further ado, Mike, who's your top waiver wire pickup for week 2?
I think my top waiver wire pickup is going to be Raheem Mostert of the 49ers. Had a very solid running back, just because it's so hard later in the year to find those running backs who kind of are at least sort of in the mix with their teams. And I think Mostert is a guy who, going forward, definitely is going to be a large part of the 49ers run offense. Even though Coleman's out this week, which obviously that's why you have to discount Mostert's performance a little bit, I do think that going forward, he does have potential to be a very consistent contributor in their run game. And, barring an injury or two, all of a sudden he may bolt into a flex running back 2 play, especially later in the year where injuries on your team are piling up as well.
Very nice. Always good to get a running back in there. I'm going to cheat a little bit with my first one. I'm going to give 2 guys as my number 1, but there's a reason for it. Mecole Hardman and Demarcus Robinson. Obviously not both. You're probably not going to get both. I wouldn't want both on my team. They take from each other. But someone's going to step up in the wake of Tyreek Hill. Demarcus Robinson and Mecole Hardman both had big weeks. Very comparable weeks if you count Mecole Hardman's 71-yard touchdown that was called back for something that wasn't his fault. I'd want either one of those guys. If I were to pick one over the other, I'd go with Hardman over Robinson because I think Hardman's going to have some more boom potential and will have more value than Robinson once Hill comes back. But obviously, look to get either one of those guys in the waiver wire. Mike, back at you now. Pick number 2.
So should I do 2 now? Are we doing a snake format here, B? Or I'll just take
one? Just take your second.
Okay, so for my second pick, I'm going to pick DJ Chark of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Had a very solid second week, and I think that's a performance that he can definitely build on. He had 7 receptions, 55 yards, and also saw the end zone. He saw the end zone in week 1 as well, so I definitely think that red zone potential is there. He also had 4 receptions for 146 yards last year. Last week, rather. Last year, that would be a pretty depressing number. So I'd definitely be targeting Mr. Chark in the waiver wire.
Definitely. Good look there in Jacksonville. My number 2 guy, Chris Herndon, the tight end in New York for the Jets. Simply put, you should get him before anyone else does. He is suspended through week 5 through the Jets' first 4 games. Jets have a bye week 4. He'll be picked up sooner than later. I'd rather get him sooner before his name is more known. Go for Chris Herndon and stash him now.
Very good advice, as always.
Thank you. And last one here, as I said, we're each doing 3. Mike, your third and final waiver wire pickup.
Yeah, my third and final is going to be another 49er, Deebo Samuel. I think last week he showed that he can be a very good option in this offense. He did put up 5 receptions for 87 yards in week 2 with a score. But I think even more of a play is just the potential that he has to really, really break out. I think this is kind of a sign that he has that potential, but I do think that down the line, Debo can come out as sort of this very, very valuable player for the 49ers and for your fantasy team.
Mike, look at you, very invested in the Bay Area football team.
Yeah, yeah. And there's only going to be one after this year.
Yes, that's true, with the Raiders going to Vegas.
Yeah.
My last guy, talked about this earlier, Terry McLaurin, the wide receiver in Washington, touched on most of it. Basically, the only thing that I have to say for him that I haven't said before is just I'm buying him. Some people might be selling him. I like him. I think you should too. All right, great. With that, we hope you enjoyed this edition of Between the 20s, covering week 2 and the waiver wire pickups. As always, if you like what you hear, please, please, please go follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Instagram is Between the 20s, and then the Twitter handle is at Between 20s with 20s spelled out in letters. We always appreciate your support, and please feel free to leave us a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that we say. We'd love to hear it. Mike, as always, thank you for taking the time to do this. We'll get Amar back soon enough, and we will see you later on this week for our week 3 preview. With that, have a great night and best of luck week 3.